Satan.
What kind?
Salty beef today.
What kind of burger is this?
Well, same old shit.
Beef. Rubbish.
That disgusting Lessing. May I read something quite awful to you real quick?
Go ahead. Delicious.
One of the most beautiful parables is the concept of omnipotent Father Odin under the image of the all-pervasive odor. And here is a note below, a footnote. Maybe Odin is the Indian Atman.
Ha! What a great kitsch. Listen, those images, if those images have a secondary quality, what would be the primary thing?
Well, secondary is a silly word anyway. If they possess a secondary quality, then the images themselves are the primary thing.
Don't you find it remarkable? We talked about this yesterday, about how to conceptualize actions, events, happenings, and so on. Do you remember?
Yes, but that's a joke. That's a joke.
It seems odd to me that images emerge from what we learn from observation, for instance, if we think from the perspective of constructivism, and those images help us to think you are using them in thinking. For example, I would like to give you an example. Before there was the car, no one could use the image of the automobile. But the moment a thing exists outside of someone's head, a thing you can look at, the analogy is available. One can deploy it as a simile.
As an equation.
Yeah, so as an analogy, the concept of automobile use as part of a message to someone else, and one could say, well, I imagine thoughts to work like a transmission in an automobile. One could make himself understood in that way.
Yes, or completely misunderstood, no? Because then you have the problem of the how. This is then the big sponge is back, and it's just wiped over everything.
How? A concrete example. For quite some time I did not know how to understand the word calibration. Calibration?
Yeah, like German, calibrieren, or something like this. And my dictionaries, oddly enough, correlated the word only with German words. With caliber, or something like that.
Yes, and then one day I read something that calibration is something similar to shifting gears, so I developed an understanding how the word calibration is used in English. It points to a semantic field, imagistic realm, that corresponds to a given system or mechanism which can work in several different normed settings, just like a gear shift in a car. And if you didn't have the car, then you could only vaguely grasp or understand such an ideation.
But we have those in exchange for concepts that we used to have. Let's say like an honor code, which you could use in a simile. Those were as poor.
See, I don't think so. Though I do believe that we lost a lot of things.
Believing is the right word, for you can't show that.
But part of it is still accessible and can be used, so that you have more images available today than in the past.
That is a crazy optimism.
You don't think so?
No, on the contrary. I believe we have less images.
I am actually convinced of it.
I have read once in somebody's, a guy who was with the people of Guinea, that they were able to look at a leaf on the ground and how it has crumbled, and they can tell you exactly how long it's been there, when it fell off the tree and so on. And just like that, the same is true for all the other occurrences in the forest. The leaves, the branches the leaves are attached to, the soil, the animals, they know every one of them, what they do, how they live. So the whole incredibly rich mechanism and such a gear shift is just like the leaves in the forest.
Yeah, but I have read plenty of poetry by those indigenous people, and I never noticed them using those images.
Maybe it is just like with us in the Christian church. The Christian church also does not say anything. Such a shitty thing.
I've never read that some indigenous writer who has said such a thing from New Guinea or so, like, I'd like to compare my relationship with this person with a leaf in such and such a state.
But you don't also have poetry with gear shifts, or do you?
No, it does occur. At least the word occurs.
Leaf, you can find that somewhere. You don't know as much about primitive poetry as you know about European poetry, for instance.
There was quite a long period in my life during which I engaged with cultures of the so-called primitive people.
Yeah, and then those idiots translating it. Just imagine that.
That is correct.
Imagine that. Those idiots.
One has to consider that.
I assume you can put it this simply. Man has a nose, 2 eyes, 2 ears. Everything else is irrelevant. How does that sound? And along and so on and so forth. Everybody had the same.
Yeah, sure.
How does that sound? And all of this image flutter that is like kicking up some dust somewhere far away.
No, but I don't think that's true.
That is a tragic insight that I have. A mournful belief.
I believe,
Makes me want to cry.
Should
I get more wine real quick?
Yeah, I get it, but I don't think I agree with you.
And you shouldn't. That would be as if I would agree with you. It is important that someone argues against you. Otherwise I would feel much too powerful.
I think that images are something secondary to a mental process. When I observe myself, it goes a little bit like this. There is at first a discontent. I'm semi-conscious of a dissonance, a thing that does not seem to fit. And when I find an image to capture my thoughts, then I'm able to develop a schema for this dissonance. And then I'm able to communicate it, all those paradoxical feelings that don't go together, and emotions and moods. I can communicate these and make them fit if I find a specific image for them.
Then you are satisfied.
I believe that our environment offers more images than that of the people in New Guinea. For if we wanted to, we could understand and recreate those things with the leaves.
The question isn't whether there are more images or not, right? The question is whether we are the same or not.
If we have access to a greater number of images, we cannot be the same.
But images are like blemishes on the skin. Someone has a blemish, the other does not, but both are human beings. So you would say they are both the same, or is the blemish as significant as the whole human being?
I don't know. Isn't his thoughts, I don't know.
It is probably the nose and the eyes and the heads. I think these are the only things determining a human being. The rest may be.
I'm reading the book by Cyrano de Bergerac, then I can see how he struggles with images. He really fights with them. And with images, I mean parables. He really puts up a fight.
Or equations even.
Or equations, yes.
Parables sound so Christian.
Yeah, maybe we should stick to images.
Yeah.
He struggles with images.
For images, or images that others confront him with, you mean?
Yes, for images. He struggles with images. So this ideation concept that the Earth revolves around the sun, which as we know today is quite a given. As this was incredibly hard to imagine, he had to dig up amazing arguments. Just like Giordano Bruno before him, just outlandish examples. So for example, he says that assuming the sun revolves around the Earth would be like assuming the coast of France would move past the ship, like a film. And it does not occur to him that this could be a plausible idea. It is so impossible that the coast of France moves past the ship that he uses it to explain how much more plausible it is that the Earth revolves around the sun. Or, as he also points out, one would have to assume that the oven rotated around the fried quail.
Nice image.
Yeah, this is what I mean with image, with struggling for images. But it is of course a weird fantasy to compare Earth with a quail and the sun with an oven.
Yes.
And then those images.
His mind is set to fry and broil.
Yes, it is. He also says that warmth is the element of growth in all of nature. He deploys images that surround him in his daily life, just like we do. But I don't think his daily life offered that many images.
I think this is a reckless thing to say, actually. This is an audacious thing to claim. Are you doing this on purpose, or do you actually believe this, so to speak?
Well, I would just like to follow this line of argument and see where it leads me.
Since you don't even know what images are, or what is today, what was yesterday, right?
You think it is like it says about the Eskimos, that they can distinguish between all those kinds of snow, all those famous stories? So that a person in the 17th century in his rural environment could actually distinguish between all those various physiognomies so that it would be comparable to the diversity that we encounter today?
I would think you could claim that as long as a human has a nose and two eyes and is going around in his body, he also has some competencies to distinguish in one field or the other, in this or that. But I would think that it roughly adds up, roughly estimated, the number of images is still the same as it was back then, on average depending on which picture book you happen to have opened at the time.
I think that the challenge to the conscious perception and conscious attention was not as great 300 years ago as it is now. It's quite an amazing thing.
That is a huge question you cannot answer. Or can you?
Sure you can answer that.
How?
Well, because...
You can only perceive our images, which are, in a way, ways of seeing. You can, I think, actually, that the images our predecessors show us cannot transport the variety. We talked about this yesterday. For instance, photography. It shows us, let's say there's an image. It shows us the variety. It is vibrant. Well, the portraits, old woodcut portraits by Dürer, for example. What do I know? Those were for them, and I said so yesterday, just as vibrant. And you said this could be the case.
Yeah, but then the following came to my mind. On a photograph, you find much more different atoms, for instance. So when two pictures are the same size, a woodcut and a photograph, then it's clear that both pictures are comprised of the same amount of atoms, but the woodcut has less categories of atoms, so to speak. There are bigger surfaces that are uniform. To the human eye, they're uniform.
You seem to forget that uniformity becomes a technical term. It is just a linguistic concept. Uniformity only comes into being by contrasting it with irregularity, for instance.
Yeah, but I do mean the same.
We are not talking about what exists materially. We are talking about what exists pictorially. You mustn't forget that.
Yeah, but that...
We don't talk about the material. We talk about the image.
But if the same... When the limits of the resolution of the human eye is reached, let's say on a white surface, I think it would be incorrect to say that it depends on the apperceptive faculties to see this or that image on that white surface. So if, for instance, a line is drawn on a woodcut, it is of a certain breadth. If it is of a certain minimum breadth due to technicalities. And this might still be too broad for the human eye. In other words, if he had the technical means to make it thinner, he could have done so, and we would have been able to perceive it still. The human eye would have still been able to perceive and interpret that line.
So the skills and abilities of those people, the spectator still is able to gauge those, so to speak.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Yes, so what should we do with the handmade line? Let's say it is a grid in the Dürer-like woodcut. We have a dot pattern now, but it could also be a line grid. The resolution is mechanical, right? But it is like this woodcutter back then. So many people knew how to do this. They knew how this was made so that they could see so many things. Things that one could grasp and the other couldn't. Things that we cannot distinguish anymore, right?
Those are the things that we don't see.
This is what is alive in the picture. This is the life of the image, the richness of the image. Even the number of images depends on this, while for us this constitutes something completely different.
Yeah, but in regard to photography, so much more lives in a photograph than a single person is able to see. I think those interpretations...
I don't agree.
A Dürer woodcut is limited. It has an end to it. One can come up with many aspects, certainly many more facts than an average viewer would register. But the woodcut is more limited than a drawing or a photograph, because there are more dots, actually countable dots on the photograph that are significant and that can be interpreted.
I would add, however, that this is only one aspect. The other aspect is how a human being formed the thing. The photograph has no signature. Nothing is handmade. There is a grid, it is uniform, and things just pass through. On the other hand, there are no coordinates or grid in a painting. There are just swerving lines. Every line is different. And a I would assume that people thought this entailed a richness or a certain kind of mood. I think, for example, that I can still feel this mood today, that I can read the mood in those lines by the creator in those structures. So the structure of light and dark, for instance, those shades, those are handmade. They create a mood. You know what I mean, the images of those who made it. Those images are added to the picture that represents. And regarding photography, other kinds of images emerge, such as surges of fascination or strife maybe, shown in the picture. You have to consider that in the photograph there is more clothing, more mechanism. A woodcut is more human than a machine.
Well, obviously there's a difference between an arbitrary snapshot and a painting, in the sense that there are more things in a photograph the one who took the picture didn't want in it. While I cannot imagine a picture drawn or painted that has one single pencil stroke that did not have the attention of the line.
I think this is a huge mistake in the sense of an image only exists in the eye of the beholder.
Well, this goes without saying, but you talk about the side of production the whole time.
Mostly, no human being has ever seen a snapshot. It does not exist. A painted picture was seen by the one who created it. He saw every single line. This is why it exists.
Yeah, but this just means that there are way more things to discover in a photo. We, however, have to develop our attention for this so we can draw it to the things that are in the photo. The attention needed for a painting, not so much detailed attention is needed for a painting.
I assume that both pictures are only distinguished by one thing. The snapshot and the woodcut, let's say. It's just the words. You distinguish them by saying the photo has more in it, and I make the distinction the painting has more. Other than that, they're indistinguishable. There's nothing.
Well, it's obvious that we're getting at two different things.
We don't just get at them. We talk about them. But what we actually say is almost the same. I say woodcut. You say woodcut. I say snapshot. You say snapshot. There is no difference. Do you see?
Yeah, there's little difference in the used words, but with regard to the mental images, it is immense.
There are no mental images yet, only words.
Well, but I have concepts of those.
I cannot verify that. I have to go on what you tell me, and what I say is exactly the same.
I think the grid in the woodcut is more coarse than in the photograph, and this is the major thing.
I think the woodcut is more rugged, yes. I think so too. So again, there's no difference between my ideations and yours.
And since the grid is coarser, the woodcut is less assembled. Maybe this is what you meant when you wrote many years ago, the more meaning, the more assembled.
Yet, all of this we come up with now, I said it already, that is no more than we're not able to show me with the richness of your words, the richness of photography. The only thing rich you have to offer is the word richness, but that is not rich. It is...
Yes, but this is...
Also, the word much is not much.
Right now, my concern is not so much to communicate something to you. I am more concerned to construct concepts with which to communicate.
So, a technical, artisanal approach.
Yes, conversation's always good and valuable because they help me. So, for me this is good because it helps me to develop a concept that originates at first from a sense of deficiency. With the help of images, also images that are conjured up by your words, I can define them more precisely. I can now see very clearly the difference between our world today and the world 300 years ago. It is the same difference as between woodcut and photography.
But there is none. Both are equally blurry in our heads, like a belief.
Oh, you mean there's no difference because our faculties, human reason, has not changed, and that's why...
That is a more elegant way to phrase this nonsense that I am saying. I am just more desperate. I do not think there is nothing to distinguish. This is all one and the same.
If you phrase it like this, I don't think one can argue with that. Yet, I think that while our faculties are the same, but the possibilities are greater, so to speak, The world has gotten bigger in which we can take our same mental poverty out for a spin.
But this is just something you say. I can only hear it. It enters through my ears.
But there are no consequences?
So we have little left, right? I think I am practicing to not hear distinctions anymore between the single words that I utter. Do you think there is such a thing as an irreversible... So would you hear the words only as blah, 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 like that, or not even that?
That is not an esoteric form.
A form of acumen. Of what? Reason? An insight? An understanding? If one takes this...
Resignation? Tiredness?
If one takes this resignation, sometimes I imagine it like... I feel them sometimes. I see them, how they come out of my mouth, like projectiles that whistle through the air. And each one squeaks a little differently, though it is the same projectile, right? They transport. They have a kernel, gray and invisible and blurred, with something around it that is vibrant. And each acts as though they come out like bullets from a machine gun. Each acts as though it was a little different than its predecessor, with a slightly different mustache style, with the ears protruding more or less, and then whistling. That was fun.
Yeah.
It was very not natural.
Yeah.
It's like, I think it's incredibly difficult to...
And with the translation and without the, like...
Imagine trying to do it like without having it in front of
the
you.
script. I mean, if we do it 5 times, I'm sure we'll get a couple of words. I'm definitely on your side of the argument.
Yeah, me too.